Hello there, my name's Phil Williams and I would like to welcome you to Audio Angling, the podcast site of fishingfilmsandfacts.co.uk. I'm sat in the fascinating, almost museum-like office of carp historian and carp angling fanatic Chris Ball at his home in Hampshire's New Forest. All around the walls and cabinet tops are reminders of carp angling's past, including framed pictures of some of the greats such as Dick Walker with his groundbreaking catch of Clarissa. Plus, I should add, the actual Mark IV split cane carp rod used to catch that particular fish, which Chris has temporarily brought here out of storage for the day for me to look at and film. And would you believe, because this podcast was edited several weeks after the interview, that later that day when recounting the visit, I actually had two people wanting to shake the hand that had earlier that day held Dick Walker's legendary rod. Such is the esteem this man is held in, even now in May 2012. Anyway, down to the business at hand. Chris and I have just recorded an in-depth interview into the history of carp from the Middle Ages through to Clarissa to go out later as a separate entity. So can we now turn our attention to Chris Ball, the carp angler, and an angler with a particular passion, which in this case is surface fishing for carp. What is it then that has you placing your baits on the surface and holding the rod prime ready for action, when others would prefer to sit back in a comfy chair, relaxing with the bite alarms on, waiting for a pick-up off the lake bed?
In a word, it's exciting. It's very exciting. Everything on the surface is exposed to you. Everything on the bottom isn't. We are reliant then on some kind of indication on the line. On the surface, if you get to a level of surface fishing, you can occasionally, because nothing is forever cast in stone in angling, of course, right? You can, believe it or not, because you can see what's happening on the surface, get in front of the very biggest fish in that swim. I've had to, at times, not pull bait away from fish, but resist casting until the biggest fish I can see in that area is A, taking an interest in bait, and B, it's on its own, or I can watch it enough to get it on its own to get a bait to it. For instance, I don't know, I'm hundreds and thousands of carp down the line, and I want to, you know, a 20 pounder is still a fantastic fish, you know, I mean, there's no doubt about it, but you ought to try and get bigger ones all the time. The level where I am in right now in floater fishing, give you for instance idea. Went to Linear a couple of years ago on a nice day. I arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning. I walked round 6 lakes in the process of clocking up several miles, and I never cast once. Now, I got fish feeding in some of the lakes, none of them that I was interested in catching. I made the first cast at 5 to 5 in the afternoon because I walked round Manor Farm Lake and there were 5 whackers just together, less than 20 yards out in the water. Didn't have my tackle with me at the time. I had a bag of floating trout pellets, a catapult, binoculars. It was hot, been walking, getting near the end of the day, but I suddenly found the big ones. I catapulted some floating trout pellets near them. It gradually came into the area where they were sunning themselves. One took an interest and then the attitude of the others changed, and there were several bits taken and they all looked big fish. I dropped everything, ran for the car, which wasn't far away, and there was 2 sets of tackle set up, one with 6-pound hook link and one with 10-pound hook link. The rod I picked up was the 10-pound hook link, which wasn't my cane rod. It was on a Jack Hilton fiberglass rod. Still Mitchell reels, which I use for stalking, whether it's surface or bottom fishing, other than the centre pin, which I use as well. But it took 2 casts to get in front of that biggest one. Also worth noting, again, which is often the case, biggest is also the greediest. He was charging around trying to get bits. It only took 2 casts to get a bait cock on that he was up for it, and yeah, eventually it came a 36.5 pounder. So that was 2 casts made that day, but I essentially had 8 hours on the water. I could have caught, I'm sure, some other fish during the day, but it was looking for them big ones. Back to the walker thing. Find the fish. Don't scare them, use a bait and all the rest of it. But the surface thing, from the really little small places with floating crusts that are all around the Surrey area, I can remember several of them, not far from Cranley. Swallow tiles was one, which they love crust there, and eventually I caught the big one from there. I mean, say big one, it's £15, but in those days it was a big fish. Unbelievable places, like Navy's Hole, how about that for a name of a place, where I caught some of the better fish there, again on floating crust, because you could see them, hopefully get them to start feeding, and then hopefully lower their senses to tackle, certainly floating line. I worked for a very, very long time on surface fishing on the fact that competitive feeding, if you could get a number of fish to a level where they were competitive, not casting. Most people, when they go floater fishing, cast out and catapult half a dozen pouch loads of floating trout, some kind of floating bait around it. The last thing I do is cast, look in and putting bait out, gauging their reactions, seeing what size of fish are around, before I then sort of commit myself to making a cast to try and catch one. And it can happen where caution with end tackle is a bait that looks and behaves differently on the surface. Its ride height can be different because it's got a hook attached to it, things like that. I mean, I played around with getting pop-up boilies obviously fashioned into a shape to whatever I was using at the time, whether it be mixer or floating trout pellets, but then making up boilies that look the same but with a certain amount of buoyancy in, which when you looked at them with the hook on the water, they sat the same in the because believe you me, when fish are fished for on the surface, that's where I'm particularly good, where people can't catch them. It's things like ride height that can make a difference. But if you can get them competitively feeding, generally tackle concerns go out the window. For instance, Raisbury, I'm known for floater fishing at Raisbury, and caught one of the biggest fish at the time from there. And I, over a 3-year period of creeping round, miles and miles and miles of walking and looking and searching, I caught 6 fish in those 3 years, 6 carp in those 3 years, one of them twice, so 5 different fish. And to catch those 6 fish, my bait was in the water probably 5 or 6 minutes, because I only ever cast when I got them feeding and I thought I was going to catch one, including at the time, a really big fish, a 36 1/4 pounder, especially a place like Raisbury where you're chasing in 100 acres 25, 30 fish. So it was quite difficult, but I proved that, from the largest inland sea, such as places like that, to the smallest little places like Navy's Hole, if you applied the technique correctly, you could catch them. And in the 80s, when it was really starting to take hold, it appears very few people were willing to do this, willing to adopt this. I'll give you a classic instance. When I returned to Cut Mill in the 80s, after being there all the way through the 60s, I rejoined the club, I think in 84, something like that. And though we started off boilie fishing, I soon realised that loads of fish were floating around, and I started fishing for a little 9-foot fiberglass rod, little 301 reel, 6-pound little links, no snags or anywhere. I'm in trees in the edge, but no snags out in the water. Dozens and dozens and dozens of fish. The thing that I could never understand. I mean, there are times when I do stop. I mean, if I've caught 4 or 5 fish, that's it. Do you want to have a go? I'm going to go. Especially when I've caught a big one, I've often walked away, which people find very strange, but loads and loads of anglers, not people, anglers, saw me catch these fish. I always remember people took pictures for me, helped me netting them. Do you want to? I don't know. I've got the right rod. And I mean, I come back 2 days later. Anybody been floating? No, I don't think so. Nobody's been floating. And then, put out some mixers and they're there. It was an incredible period, and including some of the big ones as well, the 20-pounders that were there in the water. I managed to catch virtually all of them, and some of them sort of more than once. So that was an incredible period. The Oxford time at Manor was fantastic floater fishing period as well. I mean, I've mentioned Roy Parsons earlier on. I'll give you another classic Roy Parsons gag. I arrived there one day, and in a slightly different area to that I was mentioning before, not the Whitney Bank, but one at right angles to that bank. But the fish were well out, or cruising around well out, and I managed to get them to come a little bit close and starting to feed. Anyway, I hooked one and got it in, and nobody really around, so I rang Roy, come take a picture. It was a nice 20-pound odd common carp. Anyway, I wanted some, because it was a lovely looking fish. I mean, I know they're all lovely looking, but this was another beautiful looking one. I thought, because I'm known for these pictures on the map, these kind of shots I'm known for, yeah. So I'm messing about trying to get the camera sorted, and Roy's standing by the water and says, for goodness sake, will you get your behind down here and get a bait out again and go and Garrity out here, And so I went down, and while Roy stood there with me, I just cast out, and gee, I was in again. Ended up, I think, with a trio of 20-pounders, just like that. Another place that had never really seen surface fishing before, was way over in Essex, called Frining Fisheries, which is a beautiful, beautiful lake set in a lovely rolling, or that part of Essex, rolling kind of countryside, well away from main roads. And when the gates first opened, I went over, or got invited over there, did a feature for Carp Talk for him, to get the business up and off the ground. And there was plenty of fish in there, not particularly big ones, but they grew and grew and grew. Now they're monsters. But then in the mid-90s, I was there one day, and you get these exceptional conditions where, though the fish are out of range, not out of range, they're a long cast from the bank, with the wind coming over your shoulder, the wind would hit the water 20 yards out and the ripple would continue. Just get a mixer to that line and then it would drift out, And you could do the same with a hook bait, with the controller cast out. You feed the line out and then you can gradually get it so you don't disturb the area, you just drift into it naturally. So hook bait's coming in, similar to the freebies, right? And I'd done, up until that stage, I'd done 320s in sort of an afternoon twice before. Once I think, man, I might have done it, 2 or 3 times before. The third one came ashore that afternoon at Friday Fisheries, and he came down, Chris Knowles, the owner, came down, took a picture, and cast. I'm looking at my light, I was a long way from Frimley, where I lived at Frimley then, and it's about 6 o'clock now, and I think, oh gee, you got the A13 or the A14, whatever it is. Oh, it's going to be murder. And of course, Chris has gone, look, they're still out there. All right. One more cast. Can you believe it? Almost straight away, there's a great fountain of water, and I'm in again. And in came the fourth 20-pounder. And earlier on, I'd caught a near miss, like a 19-something. It was a 5-fish catch, including 4 over 20. To this day, so that is 12, 14 years ago, if I run up Chris now, and I'll go over next month, will he float fishing me? No. So from that point of view, it's been great for me. The majority of the big fish I've caught, the carp over 30 pound in this country, though I have caught them on boilies, but the majority of them have come off the top. And also a queer, sort of quirky factor that often amuses people, as I often said years ago in an interview with Carp World, when I'd go on the water with a cane rod and a Mitchell reel and a straw hat and some kind of novelty act. But the fact is, I do use cane. In fact, I'm the only person left in carp fishing ever. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think. I'm the only person to have a carbon rod and a split cane rod named after them. So There's the Insight carbon rods that Leslie's produced, the Chris Ball signature rods, carbon fibre, and Sharp's produce a Chris Ball all-rounder 11-foot cane carp rod. So that's a sort of something that's unusual to me. When I bottom fish, living here in the New Forest gives me fantastic access to the Stour and the River Avon. And since we've lived here 10 years now, about 6-7 years ago, I've had a concerted effort to catch the carp in the rivers, and I've had a lot of success, or quite a lot of success, on the tidal Stour. And of course then I wouldn't use split cane. So I'm in a hostile country, you're fishing to stanchions, you're fishing all kinds of rubbish down the river, and so I'm telling you the kind of finesse sometimes that I've adopted in surface fishing with 6-pound hook links and light rods and small reels and stuff like that, to fishing to take no prisoners in the environment, because you fish to the environment that you find yourself in. So unbelievably, I fish with 25-pound hook links, 15-pound main line, and 2.5 ounce lead, but that's because the conditions sort of demand that. So yeah, the floater fishing goes on and on. I managed to most years to catch a sort of good number off the top, and occasionally, I bump into a big one. That's my first 30-pound common, UK common, just a tremendous fish. Hooked 2 that day, another decent one I hooked, which unfortunately I lost. But it's those kind of pictures which people seem to like with cane rods. Obviously a wooden catapult for floating trout fellows. That's a good little story. Quick, it's to do with floater fishing. This one you'll like. In the mid-1990s, Edward Barder started a company producing probably some of the finest split cane rods in the world. Did his training at Hardy's. He had a famous angling father, a thoroughly all-round, well-educated guy, and I got to know him, and I went to his in a mill, beautiful, right on the Kennet, beautiful workshop, and he started producing rods, all kinds of rods, fly rods, coarse rods, carp rods. He used Chris Yates, they produced the Chris Yates rods, and so on and so forth. I was there one day, the business became brisk, that he employed somebody else, who's still there now, Colin Whitehouse, another master rod builder, wonderful, anything to do with floats and all ancillary equipment, float cases, magnificent. And on the workshop bench was a wooden catapult. And I said, good grief, look at that. He said, oh yeah, he said, I've just finished it. We supply them to a local shop. He said, I only make about half a dozen a year, something like that. I think we got a couple here and the shop's got 1 or 2. Said, expensive, but people like them. Anyway, I took a sort of shine to it. He's going, well, yeah, take it. No, I don't want it for nothing. No. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll do you a review on it. All right, I'll do a review in Carp Talk, because there's a certain faction of the membership, do like the oldie worldy stuff, or traditional, should I say, not oldie worldy. And so I said, right, we'll do a deal. Yeah, I'll do a review. Thank you very much indeed. So I took it out. I remember going to Linear Fisheries within a day or so, and it wasn't people coming up and saying, you caught anything yet, mister? It was, where'd you get a catapult? And the review appeared in Carp Talk on a Wednesday, a couple of weeks later. By 9:10, he'd sold both of them in the workshop, and then referred them to Thatcham Angling, or the local tackle shop, which sold by 10 o'clock the remaining 3. When I went back a month or so later, when I saw Colin, I walked in the workshop, Colin White, I said, just a bloke. I'm never, ever, ever, ever going to give you anything ever again. And don't put it in the paper. Because the phone was ringing on and off for weeks. I'm trying to get one of these catapults. In fact, that's dated, because he signed the dates, everything. That's 96, I do know that. So, yeah, it is quite a while ago. The thing is, it's set up so it uses Drennan feeder pelt elastic, so just standard elastic. It's not anything special, but it's made out of several bits of wood, and there's a strengthening piece of split cane down the middle. It's a work of art, that you'd expect with somebody like that. So from catching, the first carp on crust in 1959, here we are.
Can we now start to focusing on baits, loose feed and feeding frequencies, in the hope that armed with the right tactical knowledge you've just given us, more carp anglers may actually follow your passionately argued example?
Right, baits. Early on, as we mentioned, time-honoured, everybody who's been in fishing for some considerable time will have used floating crust at some stage. Used to get find special loaves, sandwich loaves, let them go slightly stale, to make the crust more durable. Often we would free line earlier on, and to get the weight, the time-honoured method of dunking the crust quickly to get a little bit of extra range. Controller fishing, where you're using a weight to get out the bait, was something I started using in the early 80s. Gardner Tackle started importing the French Bonnard controllers, which are clear plastic with a tiny little red sight bob, but inside the plastic fits into the base was a weight, and obviously there was various weights that would give you, though they were in grams, they were equivalent to sort of, I don't know, a 3/4 ounce controller, an ounce, 1 ounce, a quarter, so on and so forth, which would require a hook link, and the hook link would often be, I don't know, I'd use maybe 6 foot, somewhere around about then. There would be a swivel on one end of which the controller would butt up against. The other side would either be a stop knot or a float stop, because semi-fixing that controller would help no end in helping to hook the fish. There was some kind of resistance and weight there. The hooks were generally small. The hooks obviously over the years have become much better, both in temper and design, where you can confidently use very small hooks. Here, to give you an idea, mid 30 pounders have been caught on these very small hooks. 36 and a quarter and 33 pounder both hooks I've used. So for the surface, they're Drennan ones. There's a great many these days. Corda do some good ones as well. So semi-fixing is important as far as bait is concerned. In the 70s, the boilie cake, or the floater cake as it became known, all you did was produce a boilie mix, and it would consist of components up to 10 ounces, a mix of 10 ounces, which would have some casein, some caseinate, some vitamilo, some vitamins and minerals, whatever, together, mixed in with 6 eggs to produce a 10-ounce mix, which you roll into a ball, eventually into a sausage, cut them up, roll them into baits, put them in water to form a skin, and that was your boilie. Now, if you double the amount of eggs, still a 10-ounce mix, but put in a dozen eggs, then you produced a runny sort of liquid, and put into a flat pan, you produced in the oven, after a while, a floater cake. I've got to tell you, I wasn't that successful at making them. I had many goes at it, but some of my friends always seem to produce better versions of floater cake. Obviously, it's quite a time-consuming thing to do, and in the end, sort of having 3/8 of an inch or half-inch square bits of floater cake, which were that thick, they were a durable version of floating crust, but you could add a flavour to them, of course. Wonderful flavours that I used early on were mellow brandy. I remember that being particularly good. That was by Jeff Kemp. There was, trying to think, sort of those sweetish ones. Those flavours appear to be quite good. You couldn't mass bait up with it, that was the thing, because you produce a tray like that, you might have had, I don't know, 100, 3/8 of an inch baits and maybe 150. It was only the advent around 1983 of packeted pet foods that came to the fore, and one came head and shoulders above anything else, which was manufactured by Pedigree Foods, and it was Chum Mixer, which was a preformed roundish biscuit to add to a supplement to dog's food with their meat to mix it up. This was cheap, widely available, and the carp loved it. And Here we have people like the late Chris Curry to thank for introducing me and many other people to the idea of what was happening on the bottom with particle baits. In other words, masses of same size foods, whether it be tiny bits of hemp or groats or sweet corn or whatever, but doing that on the surface, which chum mixer and the cat foods meow mix, there's countless amounts of them. And that produced, a mass hysteria on the surface, which then led forward to maybe getting a good chance of hooking one or two of them. I played around a lot with how, because obviously it was too hard to mount directly on the hook. We had the hair rig at the time, and people played around with attaching them very tightly to the hook, which was fine. It was fiddly. You couldn't, if you did a hair rig or even a little bait band, I'll come to bait bands a bit more in a minute, because they're an integral part of this packeted pet food phenomena that happened. But they were fiddly. You could do it at home, pre-drill them and mount them on the hair, but in a live situation, I've done DVDs, filming, I've done everything like that and written books about it, but live on the bank fishing, the last thing you need to be doing, when they're at it out there, bits come off, or you cast in the trees and it's come off, you're fiddling around you need to get a bait on and get it back out there quick. And it was altogether fiddly until bait bands came around, and then by doing a sort of around the shank and through itself, pulling it so it fixed at the fulcrum point around the middle of the shank. These bait bands came in various diameters. You could slip easily, that withstand the cast, slip a piece of mixer under there, and a lot came to that. Then there was a period where Clive Williams, who is a notable carp angler, he's also a tackle agent, has been for many years, brought into this country, I don't know whether they were UK manufactured or not, but introduced the carp fishing world to cork balls, which have been used for a variety of things over the years. One of their main uses is to wrap boilie paste around them and then boil them to produce a boiled bait, but obviously one that floated. Very much more reliable version of a pop-up boilie, which is made out of ingredients that are light. And they're still very much around these days, cork ball pop-ups. But in its raw state, and obviously these came in 10mm, 12mm or bigger in diameter, he gave me some, have a go for that. And I looked and played around with what the hell. Again, you can bore them through, to put them on the hair ring. Sure was a way of mounting them on the hook until I came up with the idea. A sharp scalpel, you have to be careful to make an incision to about half depth, and then you could manipulate the shank of the hook into the gap. And a little trick I came up with, which was even better, was that if you turn that slit to coincide with the direction of the eye, if you slipped it over the eye and then turned it, you locked it in position. Great, and cork balls are sort of turned a few people's eyes, because the only time you ever lost it, you never needed to rebait, so you were always there for that opportune moment. Should a fish, nothing's happened for 10 minutes, and suddenly a couple of fish have shown, and of course that's the time when you've got a bit of sodden mixer, because you haven't cast for 10 minutes, it flies off, doesn't it? A sod's law happens. So for the instantaneous opportunist surface fishing, cork balls, also they alleviated the ride height problem that I was mentioning. This is where fish have been consistently fished for on the surface. They're sometimes wary about how the height of the thing there. Hook lengths, just played about with all kinds of ones. I had a fantastic period in that cut mill period I was telling you about, with sky blue fluorescent hook lengths. Now tell me, how mad is that? Terry Eustace of Gold Label Tackle gave me some of this, and he said, "Hey, try this," and I looked at it. I don't know, it was very obvious on the surface. From underneath, I'll even admit to being in the bath, in years gone past, with goggles on and looking at bait from underneath, crazy things like that. And obviously the line as well. So, yeah, that revolution of packeted pet foods and mass feeding on the surface created a stir within floater fishing, and it encouraged for quite a time people to try their hand at surface fishing. Again, I did a slideshow somewhere in Melton Mowbray or somewhere around there, and in the break a fella came up to me, he's still a friend today, first time I met him, introduced himself, and he said, I'd just like to say that you're saying all this surface fishing, all this chum mixer, because obviously it had formed part of the slideshow. He said, I'm due to retire soon. I've been at Pedigree Foods for, I don't know, 25 odd years or whatever. And at one stage I worked on the mixer production line. I said, come here, I want to shake your hand. That was Roy Carp, and he's still very much around now. Lovely chap, but yeah, that was funny. Maybe I should have taken out some shares in Pedigree Foods. Good God, I did write and talk an awful lot about it. Again, just carrying on from that, I suddenly realised that of course you could ring the changes quite easily, because a mixer in particular would take a flavour and a colour very well. Formulated a little thing to make your own individual label of bait by, for instance, the freezer bags that you get will have to have a good seal on them. So a large Iceland, I think I used it at one stage. £1.5 dry weight of mixer in there, 160 millilitres of water, put in a flavour, 10 mil of whatever. Put a colour in there as well. Don't put, especially powdered colour, don't put the colour in the bag, because when you add the liquid, because you need to blow it up and make air inside, you'll come out with lips like Marilyn Monroe. So always put the colour into the liquid, shake it all up, place it into there, seal the bag, making sure it's a big air, and then rotate it. The inside of the bag will go, you know, if it's red, it'll go a red colour, and then leave it 5 minutes, pick it up again, and after 10 minutes it gets absorbed in there. You can freeze it, so you can bring out a packet of £1.5 would last me an afternoon, quite easy. This is when I went on to seafood flavours, very good. Let me think, lobster thermidor from Hutchinson was a good one. Richworth did oils as well, fish oils, which were good. One of the advantages that I've found as we went on to floating trout pellets after the whole pet food thing was that the very oily 12 or 14 mil floating trout pellets, in a ripple it would go flat in the area you're fishing where the bait is. You could see your hook bait, or ascertain where your hook bait was, far better than in a ripple. And obviously there was a massive attraction zone around there. It would rise and fall, that oil that came off it. So we went on to floating trout pellets, which is still now the mainstay that I use these days. Again, widely available, not particularly expensive, and in the car at all times of the year. I've got a 5 litre tub full of them in there. I've got a bag, a floater bag anyway that I use, but I have a backup in there. That ever comes out and I ever get taken short, you know, suddenly arrive at a fishery to, I don't know, creep round with a worm on the float in the edge, and suddenly they're floating around the top. It's nothing to get another rod out of the car, but make sure that I never leave the mixer. Good story to show that in action. In 1983, in January, I went to Cut Mill to fish, and when I arrived there that day, I couldn't believe it. The place was bloody frozen. I thought it unlikely that it'd be frozen. I thought, oh, gee, and it was everywhere. There were some silver birches in the water, and it was bright sun, you know, crisp and bright and cold. And the sun was shining this whole bank, and where these silver birches were in the water, the ice had just come up to the fringes there, and it left, I don't know, an area perhaps the size of the kitchen free. And when I looked in there, gee, there was some dark shapes floating around. So I raced all the way back up that, people that know Carp Mill know that sandy slope. I ran all the way back up there to the car, came back with some mixer, threw it in, and one fish in particular was up, a good one. It was there. Gee. Right, so when I always got in the boot of the car, the little floater rod, this is in the depths of winter when it's frozen, came back down, got a bait in front of this fish, and got it out, and it was a 20-pounder, and 95% of the lake was frozen, and this one little area, and I've got pictures of it and what have you. You know, I'm used to sort of carp doing strange things, but that took my breath away, I tell you. I thought, blimey, 20. I went on to catch a number of ones, and in the mid-80s, when I first had a video camera, I did video a sequence where I'd hooked a fish by the side of the ice on the top. It went under the ice, and I thrust the rod down the water. It was taking line all the time, and where the ice was sort of thin, a further 20 yards in, it broke sort of surface, broke the ice. Anyway, I eventually got it back in. It was like a 14, 15 pounder. I mean, it was a bizarre, extraordinary circumstance to catch it. A fellow came down and looked at it, took some photos for me. And I picked up the video camera, and you could see, and I followed where this fish had gone, because it had broken the cat ice at the edge. You could see the line jagged, and then this hole about 20 yards in. And this is where our paths crossed with Graham Pullen on the last day of the 1990-1991 season, the 14th of March 1991, at one of the lakes I mentioned right at the start when Chris Yates and I found the Leany books and looked in there, Hawley Lake near Fleet. I'd concentrated on that place on the bottom, and had failed to sort of catch anything over quite a few years. Looked a few but never managed to land any. But on the surface I suddenly found under these rhododendron bushes that the fish would hang about under there, and on the last day of the season I went, and it would have been about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Obviously we've got failing light, about 4 or 5 o'clock, and the conditions were good, and there were fish coming up and taking in tight circumstances, but I knew there was 1 or 2 spots I stood a chance of getting them out. Again, a little 9-foot rod. Anyway, saw this big one, put it in close to it. Sure, it took it. A titanic struggle, but I got it out. And my mate, who I rang, because I had a mobile phone then, I've had a mobile phone since 1989, I rang, and he was going to France. He couldn't come. He was actually going to Dover, like that afternoon. So this is before Carp Talk started, so I rang the Mail, Anglers Mail used to do bits and pieces with, and ultimately they sent a local representative, who they knew, which was Graham, who lived close by. He was a very competent, well, he was 20 years ago, a competent photographer, and obviously, good, very good all-round angler. Anyway, Graham came over and took some video for me, because of course I have my video camera with me. Not the little things these days, but one about that size, about 15 inches long. He took some video, and also took some very nice pictures as well. So there was a 30-pounder off the top in the winter. And it created a little bit of a stir, I suppose. Some people claimed it was the largest that had been caught off the top. I don't know whether it was or not. It was an unusual capture. So it's been, photo fish has just been, it's fantastic.
Geographically speaking then, are there any specific types of waters that particularly lend themselves to surface fishing, and equally others that very clearly do not?
Yeah, I mean, to give yourself the best chance, obviously reasonably stocked waters that aren't too deep, that once the warmth is in the water, it will encourage always the fish to be in the upper layers. Doesn't mean to say you can't catch them on the bottom, but it will encourage them. The lack of depth of water where warmth is coming through, and they'll be generally in the comfortable area of the water, which is the middle to upper layers. Though I've done it, I certainly wouldn't recommend it. The understocked huge lakes, you're going to have to be mad or at a certain level of floater fishing. In other words, you've caught a lot and you want to go for the ultimate prize. If you're at that level, yeah, sure, try Raisbury, places like that, which I have done, and look back on it, it's madness. But I mean, since the floater fishing really sort of took hold in that sort of 70s and 80s period, there's been so many carp waters created, and there's so many fish in there in places now that it's just an entirely different set of circumstances. the level where I'm at now with floater fishing is that I don't need to catch another one. I don't need to catch fish all the time. Trying to purposely sort of find the better ones. And they needn't be in those huge waters with just a few fish. They can be in commercial fisheries. And the problem then is getting your bait in front of the one you want to catch, you know. I'm one of these fortunate people from the year dot, because some people aren't. Some people do struggle full stop to catch fish. I don't know why, but I've never sort of been in that the problem I've got is it's the ones I want to catch that I can't catch. And it's not sort of, I'm not an unlucky angler. I'm not a person that gets constant tangles or anything like that. And great, you know, 50 odd years in, for goodness sake, I must know something about the habits of them to get myself occasionally in good situations where there's one thing I call, I mean, people have often been sort of sceptical of this, but I have been a number of times, and often it's inevitably been a big fish, where I've got into what I call the 10-second slot. I've done countless weeks of walking round the place, caught a number of fish, looking, and suddenly you're in that zone. It's suddenly, they're there in front of you. You've got 10 seconds not to bugger it up. In other words, don't go tangled in the trees. Don't let the line somehow get caught round the reel. Don't cast on the fish's head. Everything has got to be in that final 10 seconds perfect. If you can get to that state, occasionally, because you can never guarantee fish, occasionally it'll come right.
If floating baits work so well, why is it then that so many waters currently ban them?
We have a increasing bird culture on waters. The greatest enemy of really the boilie fisherman, never mind the surface angler now, is in fact not the accepted water birds that have been around for years, you know, your mallards, your coots and goodness knows what else. Seagulls. Seagulls, absolute nightmare as they scavenge for food further from the shore, inland lakes where there's food going in all the time, where it's been spotted in, where the surface anglers are there. They've really honed in on there. There are more bird conservation people around than there are anglers. The inevitable happens on surface baits. If you're not looking, something happens, you'll hook a bird. Good grief. I've hooked enough of them myself over the years when I'm purposely trying, obviously physically, not to do it. Things like a pochard or a tufty will go into 15 foot of water and pick up a hook bait in the middle of the night and get itself hooked. Other places, and I can understand this, and it's to me a perfectly valid reason why you should ban surface fishing, is people start catching a few fish on the surface, it gets around, people go out, buy a bag of Mexu in Tesco, bag of floating trout pellets, pile it in, some of it gets eaten, lots of it drifts into the corners, you start getting rats appearing. And you can understand people saying like that. Obviously, I try and be responsible when I'm surface fishing. I mean, when I joined the famous Save to express purpose of floater fishing, the head honcho then, the late Pete Broxup, God rest his soul, had a conversation. He said, well, yeah, there is tickets, Chris. You know, he used to talk like that. Chris, yeah, there is tickets. He said, but you're not then coming doing that surface fishing here, are you? Because, you know, you say it encourages the rat. People don't use it responsibly. And I thought, oh, Pete, well, you know, just maybe having a look. And he said, well, when do you fish? I used to be able to then fish when other people couldn't, so Tuesday morning, Thursday afternoon, stuff like that. And anyway, he issued a ticket for me, which in 1989 or wherever it was £40 for a year. They gave me daylight access only, not to all the lake, but most of the areas where it was good. And he issued it on the understanding of, don't let me see your surface fishing. And you know what? In those, I was there 2 or 3 years on and off, and he never did catch me. No, he never actually saw me surface fish. Here's another classic place where dominated boilie fishing on the bottom or particles. Nobody floater fished, and everybody, well, not everybody, a lot of people sort of laughed under their breath when they appeared there with silly little rods and reels and some mixer. And once I started, I caught a few, but only little. Then when I started to catch one or two proper ones, suddenly the attitude of quite a lot of the anglers changed, where there would be a rod propped up against the bivvy, which would be the marker rod, was suddenly turned into the floater rod. And some of the members caught far bigger carp than I did off the surface there with mixer fishing. So yeah, so the thing with surface baits, yeah, it's mainly at the request of owners who are looking after the waterfowl, and inevitably birds will get caught on surface baits. Obviously, I'm not interested in places like that.
On the subject of high protein baits such as boilies, can I now read a quote to you taken from the Angling Press earlier this year? If you want to catch a British record for most coarse fish species these days, or a specimen representative of that record, you now need to fish high protein baits. Not only that, it also claims that as most users of such baits tend to do so on self-hooking boat rigs, not only is the art of fishing other baits being lost as a result, but also the old, arguably more skillful techniques that went with them, the result being that a good proportion of today's coarse anglers are developing into unskilled specimen hunters with a high threshold of boredom, willing to wait as long as it takes just to catch that one special fish. How would you respond to that?
Just because myself, me, and countless other people that I know have served some kind of apprenticeship in fishing, where the first fish that I caught weren't carp. I didn't target carp. I started off, with roach and rudd and goodness knows what else, and then float fished and used various techniques and various tackle through the years. It's some kind of like badge on your arm. Now the other side to that is that involved in the day-to-day, like I have been for the last 16 odd years, in the day-to-day upfront world of carp fishing through Carp Talk, is that youngsters coming into the sport these days, because of the availability of carp fishing and the size of the fish for that matter, if you're starting off and you stand in front of a nipper, a 13, 14-year-old, and say, right, now look, we've got a centre pin reel here, we've got some maggots, and we're after an 8-ounce roach. Or do you want a boilie with a rod there and fish for a 20-pound carp? Most of them are going, I want a big one. So that, and my apprenticeship was 15, 20 years before I became really, really hooked on carp. So it's not black and white. There's loads of grey in there. The high protein thing and the whole boilie phenomena has come and gone over the years. I would say, if anything, here we are in sort of 2012, where it's very much to the fore again now. But of course, everything about 6-8 years ago was blown apart by the fact of the advent of plastic fake imitation baits, and the first one being sweet corn. And I guess a massive turning point was Terry Glebby Oscar catching a record carp on a piece of fake corn, which he did. And I remember the first time I ever saw Enterprise sweet corn, fake sweet corn. We were doing a junior fishing at Linear Fisheries for 2 or 3 days, and though I'd read about this, a young angler had a packet of, first time I'd seen it, and I had a look, and nothing much was happening, and he put a bit on and just threw it out into nowhere on a hair rig, one single piece of Enterprise sweet corn on a hair rig, and just slung it out in the lake. Blimey, it raced away. We came round, he was properly hooked. Oh, I look at it, he was, I think he was under the wing of Dave Lane. But I was around and I looked at it, and he put another bit on. It raced away, right. Suddenly, how many bits you got left? There was about 6 or 8 in the packet, right, and they were distributed. They caught fish and overfished, and what had been happening was sitting behind boilies and hemp and goodness knows what, and hardly anything was happening. So it does, in a way, sort of break that thing apart. Another aspect which you touched on, which is important, is the state that we find the UK angler in. And increasingly in the last 5 years, certainly, We've had the non-working carp angler. We've had the recession carp angler, who either it's more advantageous to stop at home on benefit than it is getting a job, or are just too bloody lazy to get a job anyway, or they still live at home, or whatever, right? And there is, and I do tend to slightly go along with this, that they do wear them down. You sit there long enough, they'll come past you. One of the great things in all this fishing that I've mentioned, the reason I've lasted all this time is that I've, a little but often, I've never tore the arse out of it. It's never been, it's been close, you know, the most dominant thing, and obviously I think about it a lot. But people have lost their house, they've lost their wife, they've lost their job, which is madness, absolute madness, just to go carp fishing. And I think doing what I do, and what a lot of people do, is going for a limited time. You're full on. I'll go, not tomorrow, I'll go next week. And I get there, you know, I've got to make it happen. Not sit there and a week on Tuesday, the fish might decide to come past you, you know, and pick up a bait or two. So I am, you know, maybe a little critical of that. The boilie construction these days of vitamins and minerals, and I mean, those little balls, a lot of them, are better than anything they can get naturally in the water. No, I'm not the slightest doubt. And this whole recognition thing brought by Fred Wilton in the 70s, that a carp will become hooked on a bait that it knows is good for it, has been largely proven. I mean, there's a happy cross mix now, there's still a lot of particles used, but they've bled into one another. Still a very popular method is a carpet of particles with a single boilie fished over the top, pop-up, or a bit of fake maize or something like that. Likewise, a single tiger nut over a bed of boilies. So it's all become sort of jumbled up. I mean, most of the you know, really successful guys, the last thing they are is relaxed. I've seen it happen where, I mean, I've done it myself, but I don't know whether I'm that keen as some of them, where, you know, they were set up in a spot, nothing's happened for, they're going to fish there, they arrive at, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they've gone all the way around the lake, they've seen a few fish in this spot, right, we'll try here, put a bit of bait out there, sit there, by 7 o'clock there's nothing happened, there's a load of action over there, just pack everything up, go, down the bank, everything on the barrow, round the corner. Some of these blokes do this in the middle of the night, where they can hear fish crashing and rolling somewhere else, and they just pack the bed chair, the whole lot up, and think nothing of moving in the middle of the night to do that number one thing, find the fish. So yeah, I mean, that's a general sort of answer to that question. They've all got their place, and there's a whole culture of companies, some successful, some not quite successful, that have produced and are producing bait. I mean, Richard Bait's one of the biggest, and arguably probably is the biggest, and certainly one of the most original bait companies in this country. Their overseas business is unbelievable. I mean, they ship tons to Russia, for instance. You imagine a ton of bait, you know, that's a big pallet load of shelf life boilies. And to far away places, I mean, Bob Baker, who heads up Richworth, I mean, he's sold bait in America, Canada, everywhere throughout the world. And it is an amazing thing. It's something particularly that I've never been really that involved with, which is bait manufacture, or I've been surrounded by people who are involved in it, and I've fortunately sort of really come off the back of them. I haven't done that much work myself.
So there you have it, the case for surface fishing for carp. I'm actually already a convert, not that I do that much carp fishing myself, but when I do in the company of Graham Pullum and my video making, we so far have steered well clear of the high protein bottom baits. And out of all the alternative techniques we've used so far, float fishing at short range and taking fish on bread or chum mixes at the surface have far and away been the most exciting. Also very productive too. Granted, We weren't chasing monsters, but we did pick up good numbers of fish, the best of which was certainly well into double figures. My thanks then to Chris Ball for putting his case, and also sharing his knowledge of the subject with us here.